Hey everybody, this is the new Slow Feeder Pro from CremaLoop. This is the evolution of their Generation 1 slow feeder that they released last year, and this one was released just a couple days ago and is going to be available sometime in June for delivery. They were nice enough to offer me the ability to test this in advance, so they sent me this prototype for me to try out. It is definitely an enhancement over the previous edition. So today we'll go through the pros, cons, and quirks of this newly designed or newly evolved version of the slow feeder. First of all, if you have not watched my previous review of that first generation one, you should go watch that now, because I talked about a few different things in that video that I'm not going to cover again today. Things like why slow feeding is beneficial, maybe a little bit about the physics of it, how you can make sure that you tune your grinder so that you're feeding at the right rate for your grinder, or even adjusting the RPM of your grinder to match the slow feeder. So check that out if you haven't watched that review already. Today we're going to go through the pros, cons, and quirks of this guy. So first, let's talk about the pros. So the big headline pro for the new Pro model of this is that it has a variable speed motor. See this nice knob on the side of it. This is different from the previous one, the first generation one. Instead of having a knob for adjusting the speed, instead you had to replace the discs on the inside. And so with the previous one, you had a primary disc. This would be considered the fast disc. And then you had other snap-on pieces that would allow you to slow it down. And other than that, the motor spun at the same speed. So with this new one, you have a knob, so you can just dial it into the exact speed rate that you want to have for the beans to be fed into your grinder at. So there's a couple other things about this with this redesign related to this that are nice. One is that they have both a knob that actually can be shut off, but the nice thing is that they didn't just leave it at that, because of the fact that you may want to get it dialed into an exact speed rate and leave it at that. They give a little clicker switch here too. That's a nice feature. That way you can get it exactly to the point where you want it, and it's working perfectly for your grinder, and just leave it there. They also did do some things that were maybe bug fixes, I'll call it that. They addressed little challenges in the previous version that people reported. One of them was that some people had grinders that were excessively tilted, right? There's a few grinders on the market that are really tilted over, and because of that, sometimes the beans would get caught down here at the bottom in the previous generation. So they heard about the fact that those beans would get caught there, and they added a little flat spot at the bottom. You can see it right down there. A little flat circle prevents beans from getting caught. So now you have a better chance of getting them all fed into the grinder, not having some sticking at the bottom, especially with RDT. Another thing they did was they added what they term, I believe they said they call it a bean kicker. But what it is here at the top, there's a little ramp right there. So that little ramp, as the disc is rotating around, if there's extra beans that have been picked up on the way up, they actually get pushed off by that little ramp. So it gives a more consistent feed rate, and as it's dropping the beans down into the hole. Another thing that people, including in my video, I commented on was that it didn't hold a lot. The previous model only held maybe 15 to 20 grams for, say, a consistent dose in here, which, depending on what you're doing, that may not be as much as you want. And so as you can see, the new one is quite a bit taller than the other one was. So with the additional size, you get about 10 to 15 grams more capacity in the hopper here than in the previous edition. Another change that was an improvement was the printing that was done on the disc inside. If you look at the disc, it's actually a two different color printing jobs. So you have both white as well as black. I believe that's PET G, they told me, is the type of plastic, which is a food safe form of 3D printing. The other one, and this is a Pro, it's not huge, but this one looks like it was basically stamped on. It doesn't look nearly as nice in person as the new one does. So that's nice to see that they've been thinking about some of the aesthetics. One of the challenges with the original one was that the hole was farther down inside of the hopper, and you could have the potential, depending on how high you filled it with beans, for some beans to just fall through, even without the disc actually kicking them in. Now they've redesigned it. They've pulled the hole up higher, so it's much farther up towards the top of the disc, and much less likely to have beans fall into it. Another thing that they changed that I think is a pro, for sure, because I consider it a quirk, or maybe I call it a con, I don't recall. But in the previous edition, it had a pretty messy electronics compartment. There were wires hanging out. Depending on how you put the back plate on, you have the potential of cutting, actually, the wires that were used to go to the battery. And they've heard that feedback. And so they've really put a lot of attention into the new design. So as you can see, the wires are very tidy now. There's no slack left there. They've now have a mount for the battery here. There's actually 2 batteries in the new edition, which is another pro. So everything is much better laid out. Everything's held in place, no jostling, much better engineering and design. So that's a welcome change. Now, what about the quirks of the new Pro model? Well, I'll list 2. One is that it occasionally stalls. It doesn't happen a lot, but on a couple of different occasions, as it was feeding beans in, a bean would get stuck, and it would cause the whole disc to sort of freeze up. And then you had to reach in there and manually move it, get it kind of started again so it could go through. And when the hopper is halfway down or nearly empty, that's not too hard to do. You can reach in there and kind of move it around. But if it stalls when the hopper is pretty well full, it's a little bit messy. I found that I had to actually dump the beans out, get it started again, and start over again. So it's a bit of a quirk. It is intermittent. I'm not saying it happens every time, or maybe even half, or even 25% of the time, but it did happen to me a few times. Not necessarily a con. If it happened more frequently, I call it a con. The other quirk is actually the knob here on the side. So the knob, if you notice there, it actually has a 0 to 9 numbering scheme on the side. But despite the fact that there's basically 10 numbers, the actual usable range on the knob goes between 3 and up to 8. So as you rotate it, it will not go any farther than the 8. Instead of having 10 numbers worth of range, you got 5. 3 to 8. It's a quirk. 50% of the knob range. In practice, having even that 50% is plenty of granularity, because it is sort of infinitely variable in between those 5 marks, and so you can just slowly, kind of gradually get it right where you need it to be to get the speed that you're looking for. And speaking of speed that you're looking for, what are the speeds that you can dial in with this? What are the feed rates? Well, I'm going to compare this for a minute to the prior one. So the generation 1 of this, the feed rate was 29 seconds for the regular disc to do 20 grams of coffee. And then if you were using the slow disc that they provided originally, which was a 4-hole disc, it was 50 seconds. Now, I do believe that they've released some additional new discs, which I don't have. So I know that they have, I believe, just a single hole disc available now. I don't know exactly how slow that is, because I never got one of those. One thing I'm adding for the new one that I don't have data on from the previous one is the feed rates with rechargeable batteries. You may be like me. I'm trying to be less wasteful and throwing away of alkaline batteries. And so I use a lot of rechargeable batteries in my household. And so I did test it as well with a high quality nickel metal hydride rechargeable battery, or 2 of them. Now, one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about batteries, alkaline versus rechargeable, is that they do have different performance characteristics. So with a alkaline battery, they are 1.5 volts in a AAA or AA. And this does use AAAs. So 1.5 volts. And then with a nickel metal hydride, they are 1.2 volts. The benefit of a nickel metal hydride, besides being rechargeable, is that it keeps that voltage through almost its entire life. So it starts right at around 1.2 and then holds almost all the way until its battery is fully drained. Whereas an alkaline will start at 1.5, come down to 1.2, down to 1.0, and gradually it dies out. So the benefit of a nickel metal hydride is that it is very consistent in its voltage. So when you think about an electric motor like this, it's going to have consistent speed throughout its life. Unlike an alkaline, which will be faster at the beginning, and then by the time it's getting pretty close to being drained, it's gotten a lot slower. The other performance characteristic of a rechargeable nickel metal hydride battery is that they have higher current. So the needs of an electric motor like this, when it's drawing current, it can actually provide more current to the motor to sort of power through any sorts of potential stalls or anything like that. So it just allows the motor to be a little bit stronger, even though it's maybe not quite as fast. And I did observe that. I noticed that the stalling at the lower speeds, at least, did happen more frequently when I was testing with the alkalines than when I was testing with the rechargeable nickel metal hydrides. So the feed rate for the alkaline battery for position number 3 on the knob was 2 minutes and 18 seconds for 20 grams, or roughly 8.7 grams per minute. And then if you went to full speed, which is 8, position 8, it was 31 seconds for 20 grams, or roughly 38 grams per minute. On the nickel metal hydride batteries, they were a bit slower. So with the nickel metal hydride battery on the position 3, it was 3 minutes and 56 seconds for 20 grams. So quite a bit slower. That is around 5 grams per minute. So just a quick comparison again, 8.7 grams per minute for alkaline versus 5 grams a minute for nickel metal hydride. And then position 8 with the nickel metal hydride was 34 seconds for 20 grams. So that's roughly 3 seconds longer than the alkaline. And that's roughly 35 grams per minute. So at the top end, they're pretty close, but it's significantly slower if you're trying to get that really maximum slow speed using the nickel metal hydride. So one of the obvious questions that you may have if you already have one of the original ones in your possession, you've already purchased one of these when they came out before, was should you upgrade to the new one? I'm going to say yes. The ability to adjust the knob to dial in the exact rate you want is worthwhile. If you found, however, that you're always running it at the maximum speed, you're just using the fast disc in the original one, have it going at the 29 second dump for 20 grams, then maybe you don't need the new one, because the new one's actually a little bit slower, and the main benefit of this is being able to precisely dial in the speed that you want for feeding. If you just wanted to be slower but didn't want it to be really slow, or you didn't want it to be very specifically dialed in, then the original one is fine. Hope you found this review beneficial. Again, if you haven't watched the other video, please check it out. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe. Happy brewing, everyone.